The sound of shattered glass echoed through the living room. A silence followed, so deep that you could hear the faint mechanical hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Olivia Keller stood frozen, watching her 10-year-old son's face transform from confusion to hurt to rage. His small hands were shaking, the frame he'd been holding now in pieces at his feet. "Is it true?" he whispered, his voice unsteady. "Are we really adopted?" The moment Olivia had been carefully planning for years had been stolen from her in an instant. By her own sister. And now, standing in the wreckage of that betrayal, she had to somehow find the right words when all the carefully prepared ones had suddenly become useless. That morning had started like any other Saturday in late spring. The sun streamed through the kitchen windows of Olivia's suburban home in Crescent Falls as she prepared breakfast for her twins, Max and Mia. At 10 years old, they were at that perfect age, still innocent enough to think their mother hung the moon, but growing more independent every day. Olivia cherished these ordinary moments, perhaps more fiercely than most mothers, because she knew how close she had come to never experiencing them at all. After 7 years of heartbreaking fertility treatments, miscarriages, and dashed hopes, Olivia and her husband David had adopted the twins as newborns. They had always planned to tell Max and Mia about their adoption, but they wanted to do it at the right time, in the right way. They had consulted child psychologists, read books, joined support groups for adoptive parents. They understood the delicate nature of such a revelation and how, if handled poorly, it could shake a child's sense of identity and security. "Mom, can we go to Aunt Rebecca's party today?" Mia asked, maple syrup dripping down her chin. Her dark hair was pulled into messy pigtails, her eyes, so similar to Max's, bright with excitement. Olivia hesitated. Her relationship with her sister Rebecca had always been complicated. Growing up, Rebecca had been the golden child, confident, outgoing, and seemingly effortless in everything she did. Olivia was the sensitive one, the quiet observer who felt things too deeply. Their mother had often sighed and told Olivia to be more like your sister, a comparison that had carved deep grooves of inadequacy in her heart. As adults, they maintained a polite but distant relationship, punctuated by occasional family gatherings that Rebecca usually dominated. Rebecca had a way of making Olivia feel like she was still that insecure younger sister, always doing something wrong. And lately, Rebecca had been especially critical of Olivia's parenting, suggesting on multiple occasions that she was overprotective and sheltering the twins. "It's just a small get-together," Olivia's husband David said, entering the kitchen and kissing her on the cheek. "Your father will be there too. Might be nice for the kids." Olivia's father, Gerald, was another complicated figure in her life. After her mother died 6 years ago, he had retreated into himself, becoming increasingly distant from both his daughters. Recently, though, he'd been making more of an effort, especially with the twins. Olivia suspected loneliness was finally outweighing his grief. "Fine," Olivia conceded. "But we're not staying late." 3 hours later, Olivia pulled into Rebecca's driveway, already regretting her decision. Rebecca's house was larger than necessary for a single woman, but that was Rebecca, always needing to make an impression. The twins bounded out of the car, racing toward the front door while Olivia and David followed more slowly behind. "Remind me why we're here again?" Olivia murmured to David. "Because family is important," he replied, giving her hand a squeeze. "Even the difficult ones." Rebecca greeted them at the door with air kisses and a glass of wine already in hand. "Finally, everyone else has been here for ages." Olivia glanced around the living room. Everyone appeared to be their father, who sat somewhat uncomfortably on Rebecca's pristine white sofa, and a couple of Rebecca's friends whom Olivia vaguely recognized. "The kids can play in the basement," Rebecca announced. "I've set up the game console down there." Before Olivia could object, Max and Mia had already disappeared down the stairs, leaving the adults in awkward silence. "How's work?" Gerald asked Olivia after a moment. "Good," she replied, grateful for the attempt at normal conversation. "The library just got funding for a new children's reading program I've been pushing for." Rebecca snorted. Of course you'd be excited about getting kids to read more books about fictional worlds instead of experiencing the real one. Olivia felt the familiar sting of her sister's dismissal, but chose to ignore it. Dad, how are you feeling? That new medication helping with your arthritis? The afternoon progressed with measured conversation and increasing tension. Rebecca kept refilling her wine glass, her comments growing sharper with each pour. Olivia noticed her checking her watch repeatedly, as if waiting for something. I should go check on the kids, Olivia said, standing up after Rebecca's third thinly veiled criticism of her helicopter parenting. Sit down, Rebecca said with unusual firmness. They're fine. Actually, I think they'll be coming up soon. There was something in her tone that sent alarm bells ringing through Olivia's mind. What did you do? Rebecca sighed dramatically. Nothing they didn't deserve to know. Nothing you should have told them years ago. A cold dread settled in Olivia's stomach. Rebecca, tell me you didn't. The basement door opened, and Max and Mia emerged. But gone were their carefree expressions from earlier. Max looked shell-shocked, while Mia's eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. Why didn't you tell us? Mia asked, her voice small and hurt. Aunt Rebecca says we're adopted. She says our real mom didn't want us. The room fell silent. David immediately went to the children, kneeling to their level, but Olivia couldn't move. She felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her. Is it true? Max demanded, his voice rising. Are we really adopted? Max, Mia. David began gently. This is something Mom and I wanted to talk to you about when. So it is true. Max shouted. He looked around wildly, then grabbed a framed photo from a nearby table, one showing the whole family at the beach last summer, and hurled it to the ground. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the living room. You lied to us our whole lives, he cried. Olivia finally found her voice. We never lied, sweetheart. We just wanted to wait until you were a little older, until we could explain it in a way that wouldn't hurt their feelings? Rebecca interrupted. They're not babies, Liv. They deserve the truth. You're always trying to protect them from reality. You had no right, Olivia whispered, rage building inside her. No right whatsoever. To everyone's surprise, it was Gerald who spoke next. He stood up, his tall frame suddenly imposing despite his age. Rebecca, what have you done? Rebecca looked taken aback. Their father rarely confronted anyone, especially not her. I told them the truth they deserved to know. Gerald shook his head slowly. No, you deliberately hurt children to punish your sister for perceived slights. This wasn't about the twins. This was about you. Rebecca flushed. That's ridiculous. I just think. I don't care what you think, Gerald cut her off, his voice cold. This was not your story to tell. Not your children to traumatize. I've stood by for too long watching you try to tear down your sister because you're jealous of what she has. Jealous? Rebecca laughed incredulously. Of what? Her boring suburban life? Her job at the library? Of her capacity to love, Gerald replied simply. Something you've never understood. The room fell silent again. Rebecca looked as if she'd been slapped. Olivia felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. Her father had never stood up for her like this before. David had ushered the twins to the couch and was speaking to them in low, soothing tones. Olivia knew she needed to be there too, but first, she had something to say to her sister. We're leaving, she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. And I don't know when, or if, we'll be back. You've done something unforgivable today, Rebecca. Not to me, but to my children. Your children. Rebecca sneered, though her voice wavered slightly. They're not even. Don't you dare finish that sentence, Olivia warned, stepping closer to her sister. They are my children in every way that matters. I carried them in my heart long before I held them in my arms. Something you couldn't possibly understand. She turned away from Rebecca and went to sit beside Max and Mia. Max was still rigid with anger, but Mia had curled into David's side, tears streaming down her face. I know you're upset, Olivia said gently. And you have every right to be. We always planned to tell you about your adoption, but we wanted to do it when you were ready, and in a way that would help you understand how much we wanted you, how much we chose you. Did our real mom really not want us? Mia asked in a small voice. Olivia felt her heart breaking. Your birth mother made an incredibly difficult and brave choice because she wanted you to have the best life possible. She loved you so much that she was willing to let you go so you could have opportunities she couldn't provide. So we were just some charity case? Max muttered. No, David said firmly. You were the answer to our prayers. We wanted children so badly, and when we couldn't have them the traditional way, we were blessed to find you both. Gerald had moved closer, hovering uncertainly at the edge of their family circle. Can I say something to my grandchildren? He asked Olivia. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Gerald sat down heavily in an armchair facing the twins. I wasn't a very good father to your mother, he began, surprising Olivia. I was distant, critical. I didn't know how to show love very well. And I've regretted that every day as I've watched her become the incredible mother she is to you too. He leaned forward, his eyes earnest. The way I see it, family isn't about blood. It's about who loves you, who shows up for you, who puts you first. And no one has ever put anyone first the way your mother and father put you two first. Mia sniffled. Really? Gerald nodded. Really? And I'm sorry that today happened this way. You deserved better. Your parents were trying to give you that. Across the room, Rebecca stood with her arms crossed, her face a mask of defiance tinged with something that might have been regret. Her friends had discreetly disappeared, leaving only family to witness the fallout of her actions. Can we go home now? Max asked, his anger seeming to deflate into exhaustion. Yes, Olivia said. Let's go home. As they gathered their things, Gerald approached Olivia. I'd like to come with you, if that's okay, he said quietly. I think there's a lot more the kids might want to know, and it might help if I'm there to share some stories about when you and David were preparing for their arrival. How excited you were. How you painted their nursery 3 different times because you wanted it to be perfect. Tears sprang to Olivia's eyes. I'd like that, Dad. Rebecca made no move to stop them as they left, though she called after them, You're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. They would have found out eventually. Olivia didn't respond. Some breaches couldn't be repaired with words. The drive home was quiet. Max and Mia sat in the back seat, lost in their own thoughts. David drove while Olivia tried to gather herself to find the words that might begin to heal the wound Rebecca had inflicted. At home, they gathered in the living room. Gerald sat in the armchair while David and Olivia flanked the twins on the sofa. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mia asked, Do you have pictures? Of when we were babies? Olivia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. We have so many pictures. And videos. And letters we wrote to you before you were born. Can we see? Max asked, his voice still guarded, but with a flicker of curiosity. Of course, David said. He went to the bookshelf and pulled down a large album bound in blue leather. This is from the day we brought you home. For the next hour, they paged through photographs, sharing stories the twins had heard before, but that now took on new meaning. There were pictures of Olivia and David at the hospital, their faces awestruck as they held newborn Max and Mia for the first time. There were images of the nursery, of first baths, of sleepless nights captured in selfies with exhausted but joyful new parents. Here's one of your grandpa's first visit, Olivia said, pointing to a photo of Gerald awkwardly holding both babies, looking terrified and proud at the same time. I was so afraid I'd drop you, Gerald chuckled. You were so small, but your mom and dad already loved you so fiercely. I remember your dad calling me at 2 a.m. because Mia had sneezed and they were worried it might be an allergy. The twins giggled at this, the tension in the room easing slightly. Do you know anything about our birth parents? Max asked tentatively. Olivia nodded. We have letters from your birth mother. She was very young, only 19, and she wasn't able to care for twins. But she picked us specifically from all the potential adoptive parents she could have chosen. She liked that I was a librarian because she loved books, and that your dad was a teacher because education was important to her. Can we read the letters? Mia asked, When you're a bit older, Olivia promised. They're very personal, and I think she'd want you to be mature enough to understand her choices. Max frowned. But Aunt Rebecca said we're old enough to know everything now. Olivia sighed. Aunt Rebecca was wrong to tell you the way she did. Not because you're not old enough to know you're adopted. You are, but because that information belongs to you, and how and when you learned it should have been your choice, not hers. Why does she hate you so much? Mia asked bluntly. Gerald cleared his throat. Your aunt doesn't hate your mother. But sometimes people who grow up in the same house can see the world very differently. Rebecca has always been someone who charges ahead without thinking about consequences. Your mother is someone who considers how her actions affect others. Those are different ways of moving through life, and sometimes they clash. Is that why you never stood up for me before today? Olivia asked her father, the question escaping before she could stop it. Gerald looked down at his hands. I failed both my daughters in different ways. I expected Rebecca to grow out of her selfishness, and I expected you to stand up for yourself more. I was wrong on both counts. I should have been a better father to both of you. David, who had been mostly silent, finally spoke. What matters now is that we're honest with each other going forward. Max, Mia, being adopted doesn't change who you are or how much we love you. If anything, it just means you were extra wanted. We chose each other. But what if our birth mom comes looking for us? Max asked, voicing what was clearly a deep fear. Your adoption was open, Olivia explained. That means we send her updates and photos every year, though she's never requested a meeting. If that changes someday and she wants to meet you, we'll talk about it as a family and decide what's best together. And if you want to learn more about her someday, David added, that's okay too. Your mom and I will support you. Mia leaned against Olivia's shoulder. I'm still mad that Aunt Rebecca told us like that. She made it sound like a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, Olivia assured her. It's just your story, and you should have been the one to decide when you were ready to hear it. As the afternoon wore on, they continued to talk. The twins asked questions, some Olivia was prepared for, others that caught her off guard. But she answered each one as honestly as she could, with David and Gerald adding their own perspectives. By evening, a fragile new understanding had begun to form. The twins were still processing, still hurt, but the initial shock and betrayal had given way to curiosity and a tentative acceptance. Gerald stayed for dinner, helping David grill in the backyard while Olivia prepared a salad. The twins set the table without being asked, a small gesture that brought tears to Olivia's eyes. As they ate, the conversation drifted to lighter topics, Max's upcoming baseball tournament, Mia's science project, a funny story from David's classroom. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like family. After the twins went to bed, Olivia found herself sitting on the back porch with her father, the night air cool against her skin. Thank you, she said simply. For what you said to Rebecca. For coming home with us. For everything. Gerald nodded, his profile silver in the moonlight. I should have done it a long time ago. I always thought Rebecca would grow out of her jealousy, but I was wrong. And I was wrong to let her treat you the way she has. Jealousy? Olivia echoed. That's what you said at her house too. But what could Rebecca possibly be jealous of? Gerald was quiet for a moment. You have what she's never had, contentment. Peace with who you are. The ability to love without keeping score. He sighed. Your mother and I didn't do right by either of you. We praised Rebecca's achievements, but never taught her how to be happy with herself. And we let her overshadow you when we should have celebrated your quiet strength. Olivia absorbed this, turning her father's words over in her mind. What happens now? With Rebecca, I mean. That's up to you, Gerald said. But for what it's worth, I think some distance might be good. What she did today was unforgivable. Not unforgivable, Olivia corrected softly. Just unforgivable right now. Gerald smiled sadly. You always did have more grace than the rest of us. Inside, David was cleaning up the kitchen. Olivia could see him through the window, his movements familiar and comforting. 10 years of marriage, of building a life together, of facing disappointments and celebrating joys, of becoming parents to two incredible children who had transformed their lives in ways they never could have imagined. Her phone buzzed with a text. Rebecca, asterisk, I still think you're overreacting. They had to find out sometime, asterisk. Olivia put the phone away without responding. Tomorrow would be hard. The twins would have more questions, more feelings to process. There would be tears and anger and confusion. But they would face it together, as a family bound not by blood, but by choice and love. And in that moment, sitting on her porch with her father beside her and her husband and children safe inside, Olivia felt a surprising sense of peace. Rebecca had tried to destroy something today, but instead, she had only revealed its strength. The truth was out now, messy and painful and not at all how Olivia had planned it. But the truth had always been there, woven into the fabric of their family. That love was a choice they made every day. That family was defined not by genetics, but by who showed up, who stayed, who put the needs of others before their own. David came outside, sliding the door closed behind him. The kids are asleep, he said, sitting beside Olivia and taking her hand. Today didn't go how we planned, Olivia said, leaning her head on his shoulder. No, David agreed. But we'll get through it. We always do. Gerald stood up, his joints creaking slightly. I should head home. But I'd like to come by tomorrow if that's okay. Spend some more time with the kids. We'd like that, Olivia said, rising to hug her father. After Gerald left, Olivia and David sat together in the quiet night, their hands intertwined. Are you okay? David asked. Olivia considered the question. The day had been a whirlwind of emotions, anger, betrayal, sadness, fear. But beneath it all was a solid foundation that couldn't be shaken. I will be, she said. We all will be. And she believed it. Because despite Rebecca's attempt to weaponize the truth, she had failed to understand the most important truth of all, that the bonds of family, when forged in love rather than obligation, were stronger than any revelation could ever be. In the morning, Olivia would wake up early to make Max and Mia's favorite breakfast. David would dig out more photo albums. They would answer more questions, dry more tears, navigate this new terrain together. And someday, when the hurt of how they discovered their adoption story had faded, the twins would understand what Olivia and David had known all along, that they were exactly where they were meant to be, with exactly the family they were meant to have. Not because of blood, but because of love. The kind of love that chose them, that fought for them, that would never let them go. And in the end, that was the only truth that mattered.